Imago Dei, Part 1. This is the Life Given Podcast. I'm your host, Isaac Lopez. So today, we're looking at the Part 1 of our first series of Season 2. It's entitled Imago Dei, meaning image of God. And mankind is made in the image of God. And if we truly believe that, then we will stop human trafficking. And the whole point of the series is to highlight what is going on in the world and the slavery and the murder that is happening in the industry of human trafficking. And I mentioned in the last episode on Friday how this happens at every level. Now, before we really get into it here, the series will constitute this Monday's episode, Friday's episode, and Mondays and Fridays will be dedicated to this series. Wednesday, I am releasing a new segment to the podcast called Work It Out Wednesday, where we have conversations about current events. I bring in someone, or I go to someone rather, who has a specific expertise or a passion in a specific field or area of current events, and I ask them just a few questions in a short form interview / conversation. This podcast is all about conversation. So while I will be doing a series, at the same time, we're going to keep up with current events and what is going on and starting to include conversation. So a lot happening here, and I just pray your patience with this kind of experimentation. But it's all exciting stuff. I'm amped up for it. This series was specifically requested, I think, in some ways by you guys, the listeners to this podcast. You guys mentioned, I asked in the Life Given Podcast Conversation Facebook group, what is one thing that the major news media outlets are not, mainstream media, are not covering? And two of you replied and said, human trafficking. They are not covering this. And I was looking and thinking and kind of investigating on how best to incorporate that into a show. And there's just so much content out there. There's so many things happening out there that it needs an entire series dedicated to it. So it might be a 4-episode series. It may be a 6-episode series, but we're calling it our Imago Dei series, where man is made in the image of God. Based off of that principle, the principle of man being made in the image of God and in the glory of God, then what? So now what? How should we then live? All of these questions, and the answer to those questions is not human trafficking. I mean, it's very simple, but that is the basic principle from which this series will be working from and will be hinging on. So today, I want to take a look at this week. Honestly, we're going to look at Planned Parenthood and the human trafficking that it is involved in. And because they have created a demand for it, because abortion is in such high demand, and they have started seeing that they can actually sell these body parts allegedly, okay, because they haven't been convicted yet. Allegedly, they have been selling these body parts, and they see that there's a market for it, there's a demand, they're starting to make money off of it. So now it incentivizes them to promote abortions. And right now, Planned Parenthood supplies about half of the abortions in the U.S. yearly. As of 26, the CDC, our beloved CDC, came out and they've tracked to the best of their abilities, because it's not mandatory like COVID that you supply them with the count of abortions from your clinic, but they have a guesstimate, if you will, of yearly abortions since 1970. And an interesting thing to put in, I want to come back to this in just a moment, but from the years of 2012 to 2016, on the chart I looked at, 2016 was the last one we had recorded, there was an average about 640 abortions happening in the U.S. If you take that average. Planned Parenthood, according to their last annual report, had 353,000 some abortions conducted within their walls. So Planned Parenthood supplies half of the abortions in the United States. So why is the research and investigative journalism that David Daleiden is doing so important in the Center for Medical Progress? It's just this exactly, that you take down Planned Parenthood, you take down half of the abortions happening in the United States. Now, something potentially to be hopeful for. In the years the decades of 1970, end of 1970, 1980s, the majority of the 1990s, abortions were right around 1,300,000. Let me say that again, 1,300,000. That was a rough average of about 25 years of this country. Since we have constantly declined in abortions. Now, I don't know what is behind that trend, what is behind maybe half of the clinics aren't reporting at all. I doubt that. I think this is actually a very positive thing to remember going forward. There's still lots of work to be done. But right now, in 2020, how progressive our society is, we're only half of what we were in 1978, 1979, 1980s, 1990s. That's encouraging, at least to me. Right now, I have a poll going that I've been sharing and pushing to all my social medias, which you can find me at The Life Given News on Facebook, The Life Given Podcast Conversation on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram at _TLG podcast _ on Parler at TLG podcast. Reach out to me, let me know. You'll find the poll there. I'll link to the poll below. So far, about 18 people have contributed to the vote, but the majority of them, the vast majority of them, responded to the question that I posed, which was, what do you think is the most important issue in the United States today? I listed 5 options: abortion, COVID-19, Black Lives Matter, education, these being amongst them. Abortion was the overwhelming favorite, meaning that's the thing we got to work on. Obviously, I know I have a predominantly conservative friend group and podcast reach, but still, it's important. It's important. I think that's one conclusion I can draw from that poll. So let's get to David Daleiden. 2015 rolls around. He starts releasing this footage that he and other investigative journalists have put together. They went undercover. They got in close quarters with Planned Parenthood facilities, Planned Parenthood managers, and he started asking questions. He got all on audio and video, and nothing has happened. Well, some things have happened. We'll get to that. But Planned Parenthood is still doing their crap. 5 years later, we're not even talking about it. I remember covering it actually on my blog like 5 years ago. It came out and I'm like, this is amazing in the sense that, holy cow, this is happening and people need to hear about this. So I wrote it. I'm just like, midway through high school, trying to write about this, trying to just share it with my friends. A couple weeks go by and it's old news, honestly. Say what you will about social movements, but they can come and go like that. Truly vapor. So let's revisit it. Today's just review. Let's review the work that David Daleiden and other journalists have put out, the work that CMP, the Center for Medical Progress, put out. What did they talk about? The video we're going to work through and play. I'll read some of the captions aloud for the audio listener, but mostly this series you might want to jump over to YouTube for. It's kind of tough watching it, but this video is a compilation of Planned Parenthood executives and leaders talking about how they sell body parts and also how they try to dodge around it. And we'll get to that. I'll offer some very short and brief commentary throughout the videos. But here you go. Let's jump right on in and see what David Daleiden has for us.
Know who Planned Parenthood is and that we are not selling body parts.
So they're denying it. So I think that's a valid exchange, and that's okay. Some of this audio is a little suspect, but who just said that? Vanessa Rousseau, who's the compliance program administrator at Planned Parenthood Keystone. We have independent colleagues who generate a fair amount of income doing this. That's Deb Vanderhei, who's the National Director, Consortium of Abortion Providers. Anyway, the audio does get better. Hang with me. So that's Dr. Caroline Westhoff. Sorry, there's a helicopter going above me right now. So the whole thing that this hinges on is this law. It shall be unlawful for any person to knowingly acquire, receive, or otherwise transfer any human fetal tissue for valuable consideration, so for sale. This is U.S. Code 289G2, 42 U.S. Code. The video is Human Capital, Episode 4, Planned Parenthood Federation of America's Criminal Enterprise.
Sorry to interrupt, Dr. Westhoff, but Dr. Nakatola has mentioned your name before as a good colleague. You just met my procurement technician. We work with, we do fetal tissue collections and other human bone specimen collection. Yeah. So, I don't know, Deborah's kind of been in contact on the national level for the past 8 months or so.
Yeah, we haven't been working with anybody who wants stem cells. We've just been working with people with particular tissues. Like they want cardiac, or they want eyes, or they want neural, they want spinal cord. So, that sort of thing. Truthfully, everything we provide, gonads. Everything we provide is fresh. We haven't, our is focused on our abortion providers. We have that department is here, and I'm sure they have, in essence, at their fingertips, information about how and second try versus first try, and so on. And I think they would be the right people to explore whether affiliates are different. Obviously, they would have the potential for a huge PR issue by doing this.
Okay, I just want to pause here because this is important to note that there's going to be a lot of dodging of questions. Okay, so they're worried that this is going to make the New York Times headline. That's a phrase thrown around in there, and they don't have certain rule books. They don't have certain stances on something listed on their website because they don't want that to be standardized. They don't want people to be able to access that kind of information. So something to just keep an eye on throughout this video. Back to it then.
It's something you were very discreet about it. Everybody has experience. Yeah.
Well, I will make sure you're here for all.
Yeah, we'll be here all weekend, as they say. Yeah, we've got a.
But it's Deborah Nakatola you've spoken with so far. I'll make sure you talk to a couple of national office abortion people. Destroy your company and if you don't time, those conversations directly.
See.
Hello.
He's talking to the national director, Deb Vanderhei here.
It's definitely liver is probably easily the most, the highest in demand right now, and then neural tissue and neural progenitors is another big one it's very difficult because that's where specimen quality and like the entire discussion is a big concern, because the brain is really, really fragile. So.
Yeah. Do you, can I ask you about remuneration?
Yeah.
So, what's your policy and what have you been?
We would, I mean, however they want to work it is fine with us. Typically, most places are doing per specimen, because it just makes most sense because that's how they work and that's how we work as well. It's actually, I'm supposed to have a discussion with one of the affiliates later, possibly later this weekend about that.
Yeah.
But
one of the
yeah,
things that we advise is our affiliates is to really consider that carefully. That might be a different situation with independence, though. I have been talking to the executive director of the National Abortion Federation. We're trying to figure this out as an industry about how we're going to manage remuneration. Headlines would be disaster.
All about the headlines.
It has to be very discreet.
Not about this being
what
wrong.
I understand from Deborah is there's not a set PPFA national policy right now, or how does it all?
Your absentee policy, and it's relatively intentional, and the policy that we do have suggests that you just really think about what you're doing, that your procurement service, and if there's any way you can do it mission-based, that's probably better. If you decide that you want to engage in remuneration, you just really need to think that through. I think New York Times headline.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. You don't by any chance have on you like the PPFA guidelines on tissue procurement or anything like
There
that?
are no guidelines.
Not really.
Yeah, there are guidelines on research, but there are not guidelines on tissue procurement.
Okay.
And there will never be guidelines.
Oh. Just to keep it.
There's no guidelines. If something qualifies.
Right now, Daleiden, I believe this is who the guy is talking to Dr. Deborah Nakatola. And she's the Senior Director of Medical Services at Planned Parenthood Federation of America, PPFA. And here's the, once again, they don't want guidelines. Listen closely to this part.
Research, if it really wants to participate in a particular research study, there are guidelines that has that.
Allows them certain freedoms and deniability, I guess. Plausible deniability.
Something like this, there are mechanisms by which contracts can be reviewed, things like that, but there are no.
Steph gets some requests, and I get requests about
Back to Vanderhei.
the because of it coming. Here's STEM Express.
STEM Express is the other one, yeah.
And because Shasta Pacific down Northern California,
Okay.
they work with us, and
Yeah.
they're about it.
Yeah, STEM Express has the whole north, yeah.
For the first few years that it happened, it was treated as research.
Back to Dr. Deborah Nakatola.
Overkill.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have a particular IRB approved study.
Right.
It just didn't fit into our framework. And so we just kind of backed off.
I guess I'm talking even in terms of like compensation and stuff like that, just to,
Nothing is written.
yeah.
Nothing is.
If they do it, that's fine. We're not gonna
Back to
say
Dr.
no,
Vanderhei.
But we want them to think about really the New York Times headline.
Yeah. To go into,
It's so bad. This is really where it's getting. I don't even know what a general specimen generally.
right. Yeah, it really varies from place to place. We would start at probably $100 per specimen is what we've been quoting people, and that some people do more, some people do less, and it just kind of depends.
We have independent colleagues who generate a fair amount of income right now. And they have smaller
At the independent
don't have
clinics, yeah.
the ability to fundraise because they're not a for-profit.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
really helpful. You might imagine that we're doing
Yeah.
so we want to have a conversation.
Yeah.
Folks will ask the national office questions, and we certainly have answers to the questions, but we don't have a policy.
Back to Dr. Nakatola.
And that is my choice.
Wow. So I don't know if I'll play the whole video for the episode. Right now, I played it through while I'm recording the episode. Now I'll see what to do about in post-production. Because the audio is in there is a little, just isn't the sharpest because of they're going undercover. So they can't have like the best equipment right there on site. this has been largely, by and large, forgotten about. Recently, headlines came out about how Planned Parenthood, under oath, said certain things, and we'll get to that. But here, in this video, in this review, they're dancing around the question. And it sounds very sketchy. And you're not supposed to sell baby body parts. You're not supposed to sell any kind of human tissue, because that gets in a very dangerous waters. If you create a market for it, then you're more likely to create something systemic. Maybe just a thought. This is pure evil. This is disgusting. And that's why in our prayers, that's why we need to be focusing a lot of our attention on taking down Planned Parenthood. Because regardless of whether or not, they get hung up on this, I mean, they constitute half of the abortions in the United States. If we want to do anything, let's go legislatively after them. Let's go after them. Let's see what we can do. If we have more men like David Daleiden, let's get some answers. Let's hoist them on their own petard. I don't know. Let me know what you think. This is the end of episode 1. Just reviewing what CMP was able to do with David Daleiden and other investigative journalists. Got to start somewhere, right? Well, for us, we need to start with prayer and with reading the word. Remember that the life that you have been given and the life that you have received includes every area of life. Current events and Planned Parenthood and human trafficking are no exception. God bless.